If you ever look at a map of Northwest North America, you will notice that Alaska seems to overstay its welcome. Why does Alaska, and thus the USA, own a huge chunk of real estate stretching down the Canadian coastline? Why doesn't Alaska end right here instead of travelling thousands of miles down the shoreline? That very same question has a long history, full of drama, and may have been the spark of Canada's independence movement. Our tale begins in the early era of 1825, when the Russian Empire met the British Empire in Canada. The two vast empires, which had substantial holdings over the world, needed to ratify where their borders lay in North America. The Anglo-Russian Convention of 1825, which not only sought out to handle this problem, but also to ensure the British passage of ships in the Russian Pacific. Regarding the Alaskan coastline, the convention stated that the borderline shall ascend to the north along the channel called the Portland Channel, so far as to the point of the continent where it strikes the 56th degree of the north latitude. The line of demarcation shall follow the summit of the mountains, situated parallel to the coast as far as to the point of intersection of the 141st degree of west longitude. Older documents from this period have a habit of being misrepresented, such as the right to bear arms.
You think the language in the Second Amendment is clear enough? You know, about the right to bear arms?
Of course it's clear. Every American has the right to hang a pair of bear arms on their wall. How could that possibly be misconstrued?
With this document specific, it was the line about the mountains parallel to the coast. The document clarified this phase as any mountain peak that was within 10 marine leagues, which is 55 kilometers or 34.5 miles in real units, on the coast would be the border. If there wasn't a mountain, the line would magically reach the next peak within those 10 marine leagues. This fuzzy area wasn't a specific border, and no one from either empire lived in this area. Thus, no one in power really cared. Just some native people who would get screwed over because of colonialism. Flash forward to 1839, when the Hudson Bay Company won a monopoly for fur trapping in the area, in exchange for some furs to be sent to Russia each year. Again, screwing over any natives living here because capitalism. Local British Canadians had de facto rulership over the area despite falling under the Russian Empire. In steps good old USA, who in 1867 bought Alaska for $7.2 million. In today's money, that's around $124 million. Included in this purchase was the Alaskan Panhandle, despite still being under control of the Hudson Bay Company, and thrice again screwing over any natives because imperialism. The British Columbian government, who represented the fur trappers in this area, protested the Americans' claim, but their voices were ignored in Washington, Ottawa, and London. In 1871, this escalated with the newly formed Canadian Confederation, who requested a survey of the area with the USA to properly determine the border. The United States refused, saying that it would be too expensive. After all, the region was economically empty, sparsely settled, and remote. Both governments decided to just wing it and draw a line on the map, an idea which was rejected by the local British Columbian government. Of course, then one of the few people in the region found something interesting, a little shiny object called gold. In 1897, gold fever swept the region, and over 30,000 prospectors descended on the area to find gold. And there were even over 100,000 that passed through it on their way to richer gold regions in Alaska and the Klondike. Suddenly, everybody wanted to be in the area, and the region's status became very important indeed. Canada found themselves without access to a seaport and needed a way to get its vast gold reserves inland out to sea. There were rumors that Canadian citizens were being harassed by local United States prospectors in an effort to prevent the other nationals making land claims in the area controlled by America. To ensure that its citizens would no longer be harassed and to secure a direct route to the sea, Canada dispatched a squadron of mounted police to the Lynn Canal, claiming that the area under the original 1825 Anglo-Russian Convention that it was within Canada's borders. Retreating from a large crowd of American prospectors in Skagway, the Mounties set up 2 defense points on the mountains of Chilkoot and White Passes with Gatling guns and a fort upriver with 200 soldiers ready to deploy at any time. Officials decided that things had gone far enough, and now was the time to ensure that the borderline was fixed between America and Canada. Alas, everything that had been agreed so far really threw a spanner into the works. Remember that 1825 Anglo-Russian Convention that everything was based off? It had its own problems. First of all, the entire document was in French, and several words had vague meanings, like coast, strip, and crest. Both sides had to bring in linguist specialists to try and decode the document. Plus, the map that was used to determine the mountains where the border was placed, peak to peak, was actually incorrect. Something that a survey would have fixed had they done that many years earlier. The map was so inaccurate that there were not even mountains where it said it were. It assumed the mountain range continued parallel to the coast, which it didn't, and all the way up, which it didn't. Finally, in 1903, a tribunal of 6 politicians was convened to put the matter to rest. It consisted of 3 US senators, 2 politicians from Canada, and a British lord, and they will be important later, so pay attention. The group set to work cutting up the coastline, figuring out what French words really meant and which Channel Islands belonged to whom. Historians looking back at the final outcome have determined that the result was relatively fair between Canada and America, but it does seem that there was someone on the panel who didn't have Canada's best interests at heart. In the end, the deal was agreed with 2 Canadians voting against it, with 4 votes for. In fact, remember that British Lord Avelstone? He voted in favour of the deal. It turns out that he was working on the side of the British and not the Canadians, and offered to make concessions to the Americans in order to improve relations between Britain and the United States. These concessions were roped in with other deals for fishing rights and facilitating access to the Panama Canal. There can be scarcely any doubt that Lord Avelstone's final pronouncement was merely an attempt to rationalize a political expedient, said a Canadian scholar in 1929. This left a bad taste in the Canadians' mouth. Here was a lord from England who, while the deal ended up being relatively fair, was working for Britain's best interests and not Canada. Canadians felt that the whole debacle should have been put in front of The Hague, or that American judges from the Supreme Court should have been there instead of politicians. This deal should have been about the people and not about politics. Had the United States been willing to submit her case to The Hague, or to an impartial judiciary body, such as Canada desired, the result would have been, in all probability, substantially the same, except Canadians would have not felt that they had been unfairly treated. This action led to protests across the country and a surge of Canadian nationalism. Surprisingly, anger wasn't directed towards America, but rather towards the British Empire. The whole event could even be considered the spark for Canada to slowly distance itself away from the Crown. So long as Canada remains a dependency of the British Crown, the present powers that we have are not suffice for maintenance of our rights, said the Canadian Prime Minister. Anger towards Britain would subside in years after, but Canada would never forget the bad taste of betrayal. Thanks for watching. I have a range of other videos on this channel for you to check out, some about planes, others about trains, and too many about space. Subscribe if you would like to see more videos just like this one, and give this video a like if you've enjoyed it. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm. Again, have a great day.